Today we discover a story where a quiet life is shattered by an extraordinary secret. Samuel Washington, a humble hospital worker, loses his beloved wife Lorraine, only to find she's left behind not just memories, but a hidden fortune meant to change the world. Shock turns to courage as Samuel faces elite families, social prejudice, and the pressures surrounding his son's high-stakes wedding. In a breathtaking moment, dignity triumphs over wealth, reshaping relationships and forging an unforgettable legacy. Lorraine's fortune becomes a force for good, sparking a foundation that lifts children and unites communities. Grief gives way to hope as ordinary routines transform into lifelong impact. And one small family's love ripples through an entire city. Subscribe and hit like. Our powerful stories add years to your life. Join our Story Lovers Club and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? Have you ever had your entire life rewritten by the hands of people you loved most? Imagine walking into a ballroom where everyone's eyes are fixed on you, and you know, with absolute certainty, you're supposed to be the cautionary tale. My name is Rosalind, and this is not about revenge, but how I learned to hold my head high, even when my ex-husband tried to paint me as a tragedy. Today, I'll share how I went from heartbreak to dignity, from giving everything to a man who gave me back less than nothing, to striding into his wedding as the woman he never saw coming, with triplets on my hip and not a single regret left in my chest. Before I begin, could you do me a small favor? Hit that subscribe button, give this story a like, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Every journey starts somewhere. Let's go back to the beginning, because every ending deserves a perfect prologue. When I was 23, hope practically radiated from my pores. I married Jerome with a faith so naive, it shimmered brighter than Atlanta's summer sun. I believed with all my soul that love could fix anything, that patience could turn rough edges smooth, and that being a truly good woman meant you could love any man into being his best self. Jerome was the kind of man that made heads turn. Tall, strikingly handsome, skin the color of rich mahogany, a smile so alluring it seemed to open doors, and a way of speaking that made you believe you were the only woman alive. When he asked me to marry him outside that small, old church where we met, I thought I had been chosen for a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its shadows, and mine began with the mention of his son, Fred. Not the child, but the way Jerome spat out Fred's mother's name. She was just a mistake, he'd say, and each time I asked about their conversations, he'd tell me, "You're my future, not her." Those words stung, bitter, yet swallowed like medicine. I'd convinced myself that loving Jerome meant accepting every scar he carried, every piece of baggage he dragged behind. Maybe that's what marriage is supposed to be, a little pain for every joy, a little sacrifice for each smile. But reality had sharper teeth. The next warning sign was how Jerome treated me as the months passed and my body did not, as he put it, produce. Month after month, pregnancy tests ended in heartbreak. My heart ached, not just for the family I dreamed of, but for the silent accusations Jerome hurled my way. "My boy's the proof," he'd boast, pointing at Fred's baby photos. "So what's wrong with you?" Those four endlessly repeated words became the verse in the broken lullaby of our marriage. What's wrong with you if dinner was late? What's wrong with you if he caught me looking at his phone when Veronica's name lit the screen? What's wrong with you if I begged him to see a fertility doctor with me? Jerome refused the very idea. I ain't got nothing wrong with me. I got a healthy son already.
You can go if you want. He was adamant, immovable, as if his manhood was proven by Fred's existence. So I went alone, through endless appointments, tests, and humiliating procedures. Call it loyalty. Call it desperation. Each month, I drank foul liquids for scans, endured needles, bared my raw hopes on cold exam tables, and left clinics clutching tears I didn't want to reveal. But after all the invasive tests, the specialists declared I was perfectly healthy. Everything worked. My heart beat rapids with relief, hope flickering back, but Jerome barely glanced up. His fingers tapping away. "That's good, baby," he said, eyes glued to his phone, barely hearing the hope trembling in my voice. "Jerome, this means—" I started, but he cut across the hope before it could bloom. "Ain't no problem with me." Don't start with that nonsense. If the physical pain wasn't enough, the emotional bruises ran deeper. Jerome knew just how to wound without raising a hand. Though his grasp at my wrists, his hands digging into my shoulders, always skirted the line. Never visible. Never enough to leave more than aching warnings. He was meticulous with his cruelty. Soft where he needed to seem loving. Sharp exactly where it would break me. "You lucky I married you," he spat during our worst nights. Most men don't want a woman can't give him kids. 6 years I endured. The gaslighting, the absence, the texts to his ex, the long silences, and the way I tucked every ache under the guise of supporting my husband. That's how I survived, believing somehow I just needed to work harder, love deeper, until everything would finally click. They say money can tear a marriage apart, but for me, those dollars saved from skipping lunches and extra shifts were my only thread of hope. Every 10 and 20 I put away felt like a silent vote for my own future, one that might finally be safe, maybe even happy. My $12,000 savings were no small thing. I hid them in the quiet corners of our online account and in my mind, imagining one day buying a home or paying for the fertility treatments Jerome refused to help with. That money wasn't just bills. It was freedom sparkling on the horizon. Then, one drizzly weekday, Jerome stumbled onto my secret, and his face twisted, greed and anger flashing in his eyes. "You been hiding all this from me?" he bellowed, waving the printed statement. "All this time while I'm drowning in bills?" My heart thudded with panic and shame. I saved it for both of us," I stammered. "For a house, or maybe if we tried IVF. But he cut me off, already furious. "I can't believe you. Maybe if you'd trusted me, we wouldn't be in this mess." "You really think it's just yours?" That was the first time he mentioned Damon's cleaning business, spinning tales about profit, about how a real investment would change everything. "This is our shot, Rosalind. Give me the money." His tone was pure threat disguised as a plea. I wanted to say no, to stand up for myself. But the fear that had grown in my belly for years now rooted me to the floor. That night, I handed him everything. He kissed my forehead like he was proud of me, whispering that now things would be different. I let myself believe it, but as I lay awake in the silence, I felt emptier than ever. Part of me knew something I'd worked for was gone, maybe forever. In less than 30 days, I watched my years of stolen lunches, double shifts, and secret hopes evaporate. Damon's business turned out to be a pipe dream, nothing more than 4 hours spent painting empty promises on the walls of someone else's failed office. The $12,000 vanished on a van they never trusted to haul supplies, on business cards no one collected, on dreams too brittle to survive a gust of reality. Jerome deflected every question with venom. You see, I told you, your worrying cursed it. If you'd been on board, it'd be different. Now, every moment felt loaded. Every unpaid bill, every missed opportunity, every cold glance over dinner as if I were somehow to blame for yet another disaster. He started disappearing for a night, then 2, then a whole weekend, always returning with different excuses about networking or stress. I buried my anguish somewhere between exhaustion and constant self-doubt. There, lying under the weight of our useless ceiling fan, I'd stare at the cracks above my head and count the ways I could have left, should have left, if leaving didn't feel like total defeat. Why did I stay? Love makes you stubborn, but shame glues you in place. Deep down, I still prayed that a miracle would land on our doorstep. Not for my sake, but so I could prove to myself, to my mother, to God, that I wasn't as lost as everyone thought. It wasn't betrayal or heartbreak that finally broke me. It was an accident with a cheap iron and a faded curtain. Jerome left the iron sizzling on the windowsill, and within minutes, orange tongues of fire had eaten through the fabric, smoke filling our tiny kitchen until I could barely see the stove. By the time the firefighters crashed in, most of what we owned was gone. Clothes, the dented sofa, even some of Jerome's prized electronics. As if on cue, Jerome twisted the blame around again. This is on you. Always nagging, always calling. How am I supposed to focus? I wanted to scream, but I was too tired, too shaken. Neighbors gathered in the hallway, exchanging glances. One of them, a grandmotherly woman from down the hall who'd only nodded at me before, slipped me a folded bill as I sat sobbing in a stairwell. "You don't deserve this, darling," she whispered, pressing $50 into my palm with a look of fierce empathy that made my eyes sting all over again. That act of kindness shook something loose inside me. For the first time, I called my mother, not just to say hello, but to pour out every secret, every humiliation I'd hidden. Her answer was immediate, matter-of-fact, and fierce. "You pack your bags and come home. There's nothing here to be ashamed of, except staying." I wanted to grab that lifeline, but shame, that clingy devil, kept whispering, "You're the failure here. You couldn't fix it. You gave up." But the fire had rattled Jerome in ways I hadn't predicted. A week later, he slammed his battered suitcase on the charred floor and announced without a glance, "I'm done with all your negativity. I'm leaving. I need someone who can help me grow, not shoot me down." Just like that, he was gone. No note, no call, not even a text. The emptiness of our burned-out apartment should have hurt, but instead it felt oddly clarifying. Days oozed together, the silence cut only by the hum of my mother's voice on the phone and the buzz of prospective jobs. For the first time in years, there was nobody left to tiptoe around. No shifting moods to anticipate, no blame to shoulder but my own. The absence was a gift that didn't look like a gift at first. Alone, boxed up in the ruins, I realized I had survived. Slowly, I put myself back together, moved in with my mother, accepted her quiet support, and took on extra hours at a second job, stacking up coins for myself this time. Evenings at her kitchen table were filled with gentle questions and soft laughter, the kind I'd forgotten existed. Every load of clean laundry, every paid phone bill was a baton of victory. My skin didn't crawl with anxiety anymore. Instead, little by little, I found my footing again. I was battered, yes, but for once, I was finally steering my own ship. 1 year slipped by, softer than I ever thought possible. No one called me a failure anymore. No one asked what I'd done wrong. My mother had her own way of healing, feeding me wordlessly or pressing a $10 bill into my palm now and again for a treat. I worked at a department store by day and at a receptionist's desk by night, saving single dollars for myself, not for someone else's dream. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I learned who I was without Jerome's shadow. Turns out I was resourceful, funny, and stronger than I'd ever believed. Life was nowhere near perfect. There were lonely stretches and doubts that gnawed on the edges of sleep. But there was also peace and eventually hope. Then, as if the universe wanted to show me there's a second act to every story, Marcus arrived. We met as volunteers at a community center. He helped carry crates of food, never pushing, never prying. Marcus had a kind of quiet confidence, as if he understood grief without ever mentioning it. When he finally asked me to dinner, he did it with such gentle respect that I feared my battered heart might melt right out of my chest. It took months before I told him the whole truth. About failure, about loss, about how I'd once believed love was something you earned with pain. Marcus listened and held my hands like I'd given him a treasure, not a tragedy. "None of that's your fault," he said. "You're here now. That's what matters." Maybe for the first time ever, I started to believe him. Step by step, a new version of myself began to take root, one that didn't apologize for simply being. Marcus never treated me like a woman who needed fixing, nor did he tiptoe around my past or the shadows that lingered in my eyes. In the gentle routine of our days, I found pieces of myself that had vanished long ago. Mornings, sipping coffee, as sunlight crept across the kitchen tiles. Evenings spent walking in the park, sharing laughter with no strings attached. Marcus always looked at me with quiet admiration, never questioning the weathered lines the years had left on my face, or the hesitation I wore like armor. But I carried my secrets tightly, afraid that revealing them would unravel the delicate peace we'd built. For weeks, I fought with myself, wanting to be honest, terrified that my history would chase him away. Finally, one unremarkable night, as rain pattered against our window, I told Marcus everything about the infertility,
the loneliness, the money lost to Jerome's schemes, and the self-doubt that was so deeply woven into my bones. I braced myself for changes in his eyes, for pity, or worse, disappointment. Instead, Marcus gently squeezed my hands as if to ground me in the present, his gaze never wavering. "Rosalind, you're not defined by what happened to you. You're not broken or unworthy, least of all to me." In his voice was a tenderness I hadn't known before, a reassurance that washed over me and pulled tears from somewhere deep inside. With each day that followed, I let go a little more of my old fears. Together, we painted walls in soft colors, planted flowers beneath the window, and started talking about futures, the kind made of small joys and hard-won peace, not grand promises or borrowed dreams. For the first time in my adult life, I believed I might deserve every hopeful thing the world had to offer. The greatest surprises in life, I've learned, come not in fireworks, but in quiet offices illuminated by sterile lamps. I'd long ago stopped counting the months or holding my breath for miracles. So when the doctor smiled, pushed a tissue box toward me, and announced that I was pregnant, my world stopped. The nurse steadied me, worried that I'd faint from sheer disbelief. I must have looked like I was seeing a ghost. Hope returned to the body it had abandoned years ago. My first call was to Marcus, and my voice trembled so much I barely got the words out. His whoop of joy was loud enough to startle birds in the garden outside, and for the rest of that day, I moved as if walking on clouds, my heart so light it threatened to float away. Later came the scan, the disbelief of not one heartbeat, but 3. Triplets, strong and alive. Pregnancy was no fairy tale. My body ached, my mind looped with memories of all I'd lost, and every checkup felt like holding my breath underwater. Yet Marcus never wavered. He sat with me during long nights as I cataloged worries and rocked me through morning sickness like a ship in a squall. My mother fretted from the doorway, fussing over herbal teas and baby names. When the triplets finally arrived, the hospital bricks practically vibrated with their cries. Nurses marveled, friends rejoiced, even my own heart, so scarred and careful, danced at the sound. 3 squalling miracles in tiny caps, proof that some promises, though long delayed, do eventually arrive. Their first night home, as the city outside glowed gentle and blue, Marcus whispered, "We're finally whole." I clung to that truth, my arms full and my soul lighter than ever before. Motherhood remade me in ways I never expected. Gone was the woman who tiptoed around her own desires, whose dreams were buried under someone else's disappointments. My every morning began to the tune of 3 hungry wails, and my every night ended in exhausted gratitude as I watched Marcus swaddle one sleepy babe while I soothed another. Our house overflowed with the kind of chaos that only comes from love multiplied. Baby bottles lined up like soldiers, toys scattered beneath tables, and laughter echoing down the hallway. Each of my children became a bright reminder that my worth was not a matter of Jerome's failed ambitions or the bitterness of years past. My scars were still there, but they became part of my strength. Stories to share when rocking a feverish child or comforting a friend in doubt. Marcus embraced fatherhood so deeply
It made my heart ache with happiness. He was gentle and patient, singing lullabies in a voice soft as cedar, bandaging the tiniest scrapes, and taking joy in every milestone. Everyone noticed, my mama especially, always ready to pronounce blessings over our heads, her eyes misty with pride as she held one baby while minding another's curious fingers.
At family gatherings, I could finally stand tall. No longer a cautionary tale or whispered regret. I was a survivor, proof that light does come after darkness, even if you have to walk through fire to find it. Motherhood did not erase the hurt, but it forged something new inside me, a resilience edged with hope and a conviction that I was, at last, exactly where the universe intended me to be. It's strange how the past insists on sending invitations, even when you've worked so hard to move forward. One ordinary afternoon, I found an envelope in our mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, precise, cold, carefully looped. Jerome's new fiancée, planning their wedding, hoping for support as we unite our families into something beautiful. The lines dripped with performative charm, as if my attendance would grant legitimacy to their happiness, absolve old wounds with a nod and a smile. I turned the card over and over, feeling a mix of disbelief and amusement. The woman I used to be might have crumbled, replayed Jerome's slights, wondered if I was truly over the past. But now Marcus watched me read, his hand steady on my back. You don't owe them anything, but I'll be there with you, whatever you choose. I thought about the woman who'd handed over her savings, who'd survived those empty nights and fires, and all the moments of being told she wasn't enough. Did I owe it to myself to go, to stand in the light of my own survival? Yes, I finally said, voice steadier than I felt. I think I'd like them to see who I've become. For the days leading up to the event, I wasn't nervous or sad, but almost excited, a readiness, a sense that I was finally free to choose not just how my story ended, but how it was told. On the day of the wedding, the church glowed with soft petals and laughter. Queues lined with friends and family gathered to celebrate a new beginning. Marcus handled the triplets with practiced ease, wrangling them into bows and pastel suits, while I wrapped myself in a calm, proud smile. Entering the church, every pair of eyes landed on our family. The woman they'd written off long ago, now standing taller than ever, surrounded by love hard-won and given freely. Jerome's mother gasped, clutching her pearls as if seeing a ghost back from war, while Jerome himself was caught off guard, his words trailing off mid-conversation and his eyes wide as he took in the scene. I felt their surprise not as pain, but as quiet satisfaction. My heart unsinkable, my children clustered around me like proof of a life rebuilt. The ceremony buzzed around us, and while Jerome's new wife radiated joy, I felt no envy, no old regret. Instead, I smiled, not out of spite, but because I knew the depths I had traveled, the fires I had crossed. For once, I was not an object of pity or caution. I was a twist in their story, the happy ending no one saw coming. Marcus took my hand and squeezed it gently, reminding me that strength grows in unexpected places. My children laughed, tugging at my skirt, and the world seemed full of possibility,
blooming beneath stained glass and sunlight. I crossed that church aisle with my head high, letting them witness the miracle of survival, not just of body, but of spirit. And as the doors closed behind us, I knew I was more than anyone's disappointment. I was living proof that second chances do exist, and sometimes they are more beautiful than first glances ever were. Walking out of that church, sunlight streaming across the pavement, I didn't look back. My children raced ahead, their laughter echoing bright against the ancient stone, and Marcus caught my eye with a look of such unguarded tenderness that I could have cried for the pure relief of it. The very air felt different, lighter, as though some final invisible chain had snapped and fallen away. In the days that followed, old acquaintances sent polite, perfunctory texts. "It was good to see you." Or more often, "You looked radiant," as if they could erase years of their own silence with a handful of kind words. I accepted these for what they were, attempts at closure or amends, not invitations to rekindle old connections. My mother, brimming with pride, cooked a celebratory Sunday supper, gathering Marcus and the babies around her table as she declared, "This is what a real family looks like." As spring slowly edged in, life took on new routines. Sunday afternoons in the park, sticky with the sweetness of melting popsicles, weekday mornings, packed with backpacks and arguments over which color socks to wear. These were the details of happiness, small, unremarkable to outsiders, but priceless to me. Some nights, after the children's soft breaths settled into the hush of sleep, I would lie beside Marcus and marvel at how far I'd come, letting grief finally give way to gratitude. There were moments, unexpected and sharp, when the past tried to snag me. A song Jerome once loved, the sight of some little trinket he'd bought on a careless afternoon, the echo of his old threats in a dream. But each time the pain felt duller, outshined by everything I'd built from the ashes. With time, I found myself drawn into the rhythms and community around me in ways that my old life never permitted. The children thrived in the warmth of a home where laughter outweighed shouting, where mistakes were met with hugs, and where their father's arms were always open. Marcus and I became regulars at school events, cheering from folding chairs and signing up for bake sales. We discovered a circle of other parents, some single, some second-timers like us, each of us balancing scars and hope, all of us eager for connection. It astonished me how ordinary happiness could be. A good report card, a successful trip to the dentist, a shared dessert at midnight, all of it wove together into a tapestry stronger than any old narrative of struggle. Every once in a while, curiosity about Jerome would surface. A passing question from someone who remembered my maiden name or a Facebook friend request I politely ignored. Sometimes Jerome even reached out directly, his tone contrite and subdued. He asked about the children, about my health, even offered vague apologies. I responded with kindness, practical and brief, unwilling to let the past reclaim any real estate in my mind or my heart. If there was a lesson, it was this: healing is rarely the grand, cinematic moment we crave.
More often, it's a series of quiet choices. Declining to reply to a bitter memory. Showing patience with yourself when you remember who you were. Letting others see the new roads you've chosen instead of the ones you left behind. One evening, after the children had gone to sleep and the house was drowsy with peace, Marcus joined me on the porch, a steaming mug of chamomile in his hands. We were quiet for a long while, watching the fireflies blink among the hedges. "Sometimes," he murmured, "I wonder if you ever wish your life had gone differently. If you ever miss the woman you might have been before all of it." His question didn't sting. Instead, it felt like being granted a second pair of wings. I thought about how loss had stripped me down, but also how it had cleared space for something new and better than I ever planned. I leaned into his shoulder, a reflex born of trust. I used to, I admitted. I used to lay awake clocking regrets, counting all the ways I could have done things differently. But now I see, I couldn't have become this version of myself without all of that pain behind me. I wouldn't have known what to cherish, what to fight for. I wouldn't have known how to teach our children what real love looks like. Marcus nodded, squeezing my knee beneath the blanket. There, beneath the quiet night, I allowed myself to grieve the old dreams, not with bitterness, but as one honors something gone, grateful for what it gave, accepting that it's over. Over time, my story became something I learned to share, not as a confession, but as a means of giving hope. Friends, neighbors, even strangers at the community center sought me out. Women teetering on the edge of their own burned bridges. Men unsure how to mend what was broken. I never offered easy solutions. Instead, I listened, holding out the quiet conviction that survival is possible, healing is real, and forgiveness, of oneself most of all, is a courage all its own. I started writing again, late at night when the house was quiet. Letters to my younger self, journal entries for the days that felt heavy, short stories in which heroines always found their way home. Some I kept private, others I read aloud at church gatherings or shared in community newsletters. Marcus, ever supportive, sometimes read over my shoulder, pressing a proud kiss to my hair. Even my mama, a woman slow to praise, began encouraging others in our neighborhood, pointing to me as living proof of resilience. Not with pity, but with pride. Lessons bloom. My children grew, too, watching with bright eyes what real partnership looked like. They didn't need warnings about choosing kindness. They simply lived it, wrapped up in a house where the past was acknowledged, but never allowed to dim the present. And with each passing season, my heart found new ways to plant itself in joy. Years passed. My triplets grew taller, their laughter stretching from living room to driveway, painting sunshine on the walls of every place we called home. Marcus and I never stopped dating each other. Dinner picnics under the stars, whispered secrets, hands held at the movies while our kids giggled a row behind us. Our marriage wasn't perfect. No partnership is, but it shone with honesty and hard-won tenderness. There were still tests, health scares, job changes, sleepless nights when old anxieties crept in or the world beyond our fence grew dark and unpredictable. But always we returned to the quiet, deliberate acts of love and trust that anchored us. Looking back, I sometimes marveled at the wide, unpredictable road that brought me here. There had been detours and dead ends, fires and losses I thought I'd never recover from. And yet, like wildflowers after a drought, my life flourished anyway, fragile and beautiful and wholly mine. People who once pitied me now asked for advice, eager to know the secret. I told them it was no miracle, no easy answer, just a stubborn willingness to start over, to keep choosing joy, to believe that what's lost can make room for what's yet to come. On quiet nights, after tucking my children in, I would stand in their doorway, awash in gratitude. I no longer asked, why me? I already knew. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover who you have the courage to become. Time, I realized, has a funny way of smoothing the sharpest edges of old pain, blurring heartbreak until it almost resembles nostalgia. As my children approached their teenage years, our home changed again, messier, louder, and somehow more vibrant than ever. Shoes and bags lined every doorway. The kitchen overflowed with debates about music, friendship, and which sports team had the best chance this season. Our dinner table became a place where stories spilled out with laughter, confessions, and the occasional slammed fork when sibling squabbles flared. In those ordinary, chaotic evenings, I learned that the true wealth of life comes not from what you accumulate, but from the people who gather around you. Marcus and I were not perfect parents, nor was our marriage ever immune to fatigue or disagreements. We had different approaches. He believed in gentle encouragement. I sometimes snapped first, apologized later. But beneath it all ran a current of unwavering respect. Lessons bloom. Never once did kindness take a back seat. No silent treatments, no threats, no doors slammed in anger. The scars Jerome left, his careless words, his bitter accusations, still surfaced now and then, particularly when my children did something reckless or found themselves in trouble. My heart lurched, the old doubts whispering, "Are you failing them too?" But then Marcus would reach for my hand, grounding me with a look that cut through self-blame. Together, we handled every storm as a team, meeting our children's mistakes with guidance, not punishment. That, I realized, was the difference between healing and surviving. The choice to grow together, not just to endure. As the triplets neared graduation, our house became a hub of energy and anticipation. College brochures littered the kitchen counter, and dreams were unpacked like suitcases. What to study, where to live, who to become. I saw pieces of myself in each of them. My daughter's stubborn streak, my oldest son's gentle heart, my youngest's restless curiosity. Marcus and I spent long evenings talking about what would come next. Would the silence feel empty when the laughter faded? Or would we finally have space to rediscover each other in the calm after the storm? Some nights I worried that I hadn't prepared them well enough for life's inevitable disappointments. I wanted to shield them from heartache, but also knew it was pain that once made me fierce, wise, ready to seize happiness instead of waiting for it to be handed over. My own mother, older now, but just as formidable, loved to drop by unannounced, dispensing blunt advice and bags filled with groceries or hand-me-down treasures.
She reminded me that the cycle of resilience and care doesn't end with one generation. It snowballs, gathering momentum and tenderness as it passes from one pair of hands to the next. Looking over old photos one rainy afternoon, I saw the stark contrast between who I had been and who I'd become. Not just older or softer, but somehow more complete, fuller. A woman who no longer defined herself by scars, but by the light she radiated for others to follow. One crisp autumn evening, our family hosted friends for a potluck in the backyard. The table groaned with homemade dishes, children darted beneath strings of twinkling lights, and parents clustered with glasses raised in laughter. Amid the comfort of good food and easy company, I sensed the incredible distance I'd traveled, from the isolation of Jerome's apartment to this joyous, noisy circle I now called home. A newcomer, a woman recently separated and visibly fragile, approached me as we cleared plates. She hesitantly shared her fears of starting over, of being alone, of not being enough for her children. Listening, I found myself offering the same words others had once given me. You may not see it now, but you are already brave, just by choosing to stay, choosing to hope. You are not alone. We'll walk through this with you. It struck me then, with quiet force, that survival is contagious. My willingness to risk love again, to forgive myself, to honor both my mistakes and my triumphs. These things gave permission for others to do the same. Later that night, after guests had gone and the children were inside, I lit a candle in the quiet yard. I said a silent thank you for strangers who became friends, for pain that softened into wisdom, and for a future I could no longer predict or control, but trusted to be good because I would meet it with courage. Winter settled in, blanketing our neighborhood in stillness and frost. The holidays brought bittersweet reminders, the ache of family members no longer with us, as well as the warmth of traditions carried forward. Marcus, ever steady, invented new rituals, lazy Sunday breakfasts, gift exchanges that focused on memories instead of things. Our children, now tall and nearly grown, brought home stories from friends struggling through their own storms, divorce, loss, heartbreak. One particularly sharp evening, my oldest son asked about Jerome. Do you regret it? All those hard years before Dad? His question landed softly, but it demanded an honest answer. I considered for a while, remembering the woman I had been, afraid, uncertain, but still moving forward. No, I don't regret it, I answered. Every hard thing taught me how strong I could be, how much love I could hold, and what I truly deserved. If I hadn't stumbled through that darkness, I wouldn't have found you, or the life we have now. Sometimes the path that hurts you most is the one that sets you free. He nodded, the answer settling into his bones. That conversation stayed with me. Life was not about erasing the past, but about naming it, blessing it, and building something better atop its lessons. Spring brought renewal, the buds of daffodils, the return of birdsong, the closing of one chapter, and the eager stirring of the next. Graduation day arrived in a blur of blue robes and pride so fierce it nearly split me in two. Marcus held my hand, wiping tears from my cheek as the triplets crossed the stage in caps that bobbed comically on their heads. My mother, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, whispered, "Look at what you did. Look at who you are." As we gathered for photos beneath the old oak, I realized this was my victory lap. Not because life had spared me grief or made every dream come true, but because I had learned to pick up the broken pieces, stitch them together, and dance in the sunlight anyway. My family was my mosaic, beautiful because of the cracks that let the light in. That night, as we toasted the future with sparkling cider and laughter, I thought of all the people I'd become, the frightened girl clutching hidden dollars, the determined survivor, the mother, the partner, the friend. I knew there would be fresh trials, new heartbreaks for us all, because that is the bargain of loving deeply and living boldly. But I was ready, because every hard-earned joy, every scar and triumph had taught me to cherish the messy wonder of another beginning. This was not the end of my story, but the start of another chapter, one written in courage, in gratitude, and in love. The shift from daily parenting to an empty, or at least quieter, nest did not happen overnight. At first, the departure of the triplets felt like the silence after a thunderstorm, uneasy, unfamiliar, saturated with echoes of everything that had filled our home for so many years. The breakfast table sat mostly untouched in the mornings, Marcus and I catching each other's eye across the expanse, sometimes laughing at our own uncertainty, sometimes falling into comfortable, reflective silences. We leaned into the change together, rediscovering forgotten hobbies and exploring new ones. Marcus took up woodworking, spending hours in the garage, tinkering with old chairs and bits of lumber, finding joy in shaping something functional with his hands. I returned to writing, this time more earnestly, crafting essays and memoir fragments, some for myself, some for the small writing group I joined at the library. The act of sharing my story, my unvarnished truth, brought me a sense of community I'd never expected. On weekends, we drove to the edge of the county, hiking tree-lined trails and stopping in sleepy towns for coffee and pie. We reveled in the freedom and companionship, grateful for the deep comfort of partnership after so many years marked by struggle and survival. And when the children called or visited, their voices full of questions and laughter, the old vigor returned just for a while. But always, the sense of completion lingered, reminding me that my worth was no longer tethered to the demands of care, but gently rooted in new growth, new adventures, new dreams. With new space in our home and lives, Marcus and I began hosting gatherings, not only for family, but for the wider community. Once quiet holidays became bustling affairs, with neighbors, new friends, and even strangers welcome to share meals and stories around our table. I wrote invitations with thoughtful care, making sure every person felt included. No one left out, no one overlooked. These gatherings transformed our living room into a hub of laughter, music, and comfort food. People blossomed in the soft light of shared belonging. Old friends arrived with tales of their own struggles and triumphs. Young families, drawn by the warmth, asked for advice about everything, from diapers to heartbreak. I watched Marcus listen with patience, guiding conversations and helping those newer to parenthood feel less lost. The sense of community deepened my healing in ways solitary reflection never could. Guests, sometimes admitted their fears of aging, losing loved ones, starting over, and I felt myself dwelling less in old bitterness and more in empathy. My own past was no longer a burden, but a bridge, an invitation for others to cross from fear into hope. A remarkable energy pulsed through these days. I was not merely surviving. I was creating, connecting, leading. My story had rippled outward, inspiring others to gather their courage for second and third chances. The architecture of my life was now built on the foundation of open arms and listening ears. The broken places acted as mortar, holding together the walls of connection we built, brick by brick. Eventually, the world called my children far and wide, one to a bustling city for graduate school, another to a nearby town working as a nurse, the third on a gap year traveling the globe. Their journeys filled me with a bittersweet pride, the ache of missing them softened by the certainty of their strength and self-assurance. Each phone call, each photo sent from distant streets or sunlit dorm rooms reminded me that I had given them what mattered most: roots and wings. Marcus and I supported them from afar, with letters and care packages, answering midnight texts about homesickness, relationships, career dilemmas. My advice drew from all the roads I'd once walked. Every detour, every scrap of resilience learned in the hardest ways. Lessons bloom. Time and again, our children returned for holiday breaks or quick visits, their presence renewing the noise and clutter and laughter I missed. When we sat together on the porch, the stories flowed, of triumphs and heartbreaks, friendships gained and lost, dreams that changed shape and grew more attainable with each lesson learned. Watching them navigate their own lives, I realized that my greatest legacy lay not in the battles I fought, but in the kindness I modeled and the love I gave. My children carried forward the wisdom of survival, the ability to heal and hope and begin again, just as I had once learned to do. As the years unfurled, small joys and larger challenges continued to shape our family's landscape. My mother, older and slowing now, depended more on my visits. Cups of tea, shared stories, quiet afternoons sorting photographs from the past. The triplets, scattered by geography but anchored in loyalty, coordinated visits to see their grandmother, weaving generations together, one holiday at a time. Marcus and I faced our share of challenges too. Minor health scares, career changes, the delicate dance of aging together. We learned to adapt, supporting each other with humor and patience. I found that love, in its deepest sense, grows stronger as years pass, not because it is tested and survives, but because it changes form, becoming tenderness, understanding, and enduring companionship. Unexpectedly, I began to mentor younger women at the community center, many arriving with children in tow and hearts heavy from fresh heartbreak. They asked about forgiveness, about second chances, about moving on after disaster. I tried to guide them as I would my own children, reminding them that grief and healing are not opposites, but neighbors. They often walk hand in hand. The fabric of my life, once torn and patched, grew beautiful with every new thread added. Friends, family,
strangers turned allies.
At each stage, I looked back not with regret, but with pride. The girl I'd been, the woman I'd become, and the matriarch my family relied upon were all woven together in one unfolding story. One golden summer, Marcus and I celebrated our anniversary with a trip to the coast, a retreat just for us, echoing with memories and renewed promises. We walked the dunes, let the salt wind tangle our hair, and sat by bonfires as the sun melted into sea and sky. It felt like a reward for every storm weathered together, not the fairy tale conclusion, but a contentment that came from facing reality and still choosing each other. We talked about the past, acknowledged the parts we couldn't change, and created new dreams for the years ahead. Marcus teased me about taking up painting, and I pressed him to write his own stories. We planned visits to see the children, reunions with old friends, and even adventures to places we'd only glimpsed in travel magazines before. On the hotel balcony, with the hush of waves below, I reflected on all I'd learned. Happiness was not something waiting at the end of a hard road, but something to be gathered at every step. Even when the journey turned rough, I thanked Marcus for walking beside me, for seeing my darkness and loving me through it, not with grand gestures, but with quiet loyalty. That night, under a velvet sky, I let myself imagine the future, not with fear, but with anticipation. The woman I was now stood whole, marked by sorrow, crowned with gratitude, and open to the next chapter as eagerly as she had once clung to the past. And so the story continued, each day a new verse, refrains of hope, redemption, and love undimmed by time. The rhythm of our days turned gentler, but the core of my life remained vibrant and unfinished. I woke each morning with sunlight painting new patterns on the walls, stirred by the aroma of coffee and Marcus's quiet humming as he read the news. Our life had settled into a comfortable cadence, errands, volunteering, Sunday dinners, but within that simplicity lay endless richness. I found immense purpose in my mentorship at the community center. Over time, it evolved into a support group for women reclaiming their futures after loss. We met weekly, young and old, sitting in a sunlit room at the edge of the library. We shared secrets, disappointments, cautious hopes, and victories that often seemed small to outsiders, but felt monumental inside our circle. For many, this group became a first step out of silence. For me, it was an affirmation. My story, once a source of shame, was now a lifeline for others. Marcus, too, discovered new joys. He started teaching a woodworking class for neighborhood boys, guiding clumsy hands and witnessing pride blossom in children who'd never before built something of their own. We swapped stories over dinner about our students, their challenges, and rare breakthroughs, delighting in the way small kindnesses could ripple outward. Sometimes the world outside seemed turbulent. News of conflict, loss, or uncertainty casting a chill on even the brightest afternoons. But inside our home and circles, I clung fiercely to optimism, determined to gather what light I could and reflect it back, even if all it illuminated was the modest comfort of a well-worn kitchen table set for two. As the years deepened, We celebrated milestones, large and small.
Emails and phone calls arrived from our children. Job promotions, new apartments, friendships, and heartbreaks. The elusive promise of visits when time allows. Our refrigerator was covered in snapshots, grinning faces in new cities, postcards from unfamiliar streets, graduation announcements stuck beneath cheerful magnets. My middle child, now a new nurse, brought home stories from the hospital, some triumphant, some tragic. Over steaming mugs of tea on her rare weekends home, we discussed not just the medicine, but the meaning, how one learns to bear witness to suffering and still seek joy. I heard my own wisdom repeated in her words, softened by her empathy and sharpened by her youth. There were reunions, too. We gathered beneath the old oak tree for birthdays, anniversaries, and sometimes for no reason at all. My mother, voice now thinner but spirit undimmed, presided over these gatherings with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has watched love triumph over circumstance. New friends joined us, blending seamlessly into the tapestry of our family. The ache of the past was still there, a kind of ghost at the feast, but less sharp, more like an old song long since learned by heart. Marcus and I often marveled at our changed fortunes. There was no arrogance to it, just humility and gratitude for every moment that felt, against all odds, like grace. Travel became one of our greatest pleasures. Each trip, whether to a neighboring city or a winding coastal village, felt like a celebration of all the freedom we'd fought for. Marcus and I found a new sense of adventure, delighted by the unfamiliar. We sampled cuisines we could barely pronounce, wandered cobblestone streets in foreign towns, swapped stories with strangers, and sent postcards to our ever-growing family. The travel, I noticed, changed me. Along the way, I learned to release control, to let spontaneous moments guide my days. A missed train became an opportunity to discover a hidden cafe. A rainy afternoon brought us to a tiny museum where we stood in awe of paintings much older than our pain. Sometimes, as I gazed at the horizon from the window of a train, I wondered who the lonely woman inside Jerome's shadow would have become if she had never been forced to start over. But instead of bitterness, I found only softness. I mourned the old wounds the way one mourns a distant storm, grateful for the sunlight that finally followed. Coming home after each adventure, we carried with us souvenirs and inside jokes, but also new resolve. We supported local charities, welcomed immigrant families into our neighborhood, and poured our energy into acts of service, determined to give back as much as we'd received. With every journey, our world grew larger, our hearts more generous, and our gratitude deeper. The seasons spiraled forward. One brisk autumn, Marcus and I hosted a harvest dinner for old friends, grown children, and new acquaintances alike. The house filled with the aroma of roasting vegetables, laughter spilling out like golden leaves from every window. Candles flickered across the table as people recounted stories, some hilarious, others bittersweet, and a kind of sacredness settled over the meal, the understanding that these moments are fleeting but essential. My daughter,
now confidently independent, leaned in as I cleared dishes. I hope I'll have a home like this one day, full of warmth where everyone is welcome. Her words lingered long after the guests had gone. After the party, as we sat sipping cider beneath a sky scattered with stars, I considered the true legacy we were crafting. It wasn't the career achievements we'd amassed, the size of our home, or the balance in our bank account. Rather, it was measured in every life we'd touched, every heart we'd helped to heal, every hand we'd held through darkness toward the dawn. I thought of all the pain I'd once believed would break me, now transformed into a beacon for others. Marcus took my hand in the cold and said, softly, "We've built something good, Rose. Something that'll last long after we're gone." I nestled into his shoulder and found peace in that truth, realizing I had spent so long searching for meaning, when meaning, quietly and steadfastly, had been growing all around me. One April morning, my phone rang, a news not of tragedy, but of promise. My son and his partner were expecting a child. The prospect of grandmotherhood electrified my heart with a hope I had not dared to imagine all those years ago. As the months unfolded, I prepared for the little one's arrival with the same fierce tenderness I had once reserved for my own children. I sewed blankets, wrote long letters to be tucked in memory boxes, and shared with Marcus the joy of anticipation and the quiet fear that comes with loving so hard. The day my grandson was born, I held him in my arms, his heartbeat steady and strong against my chest. In his bright new eyes, I saw a glimmer of every ending and beginning I'd ever known. I promised myself and him that I would tell him the whole story one day, not sanitized, not sugar-coated, but honest, so he would know that loss can birth hope, and hope can heal generations. Family and friends visited, bearing gifts and stories, and I saw our legacy ripple outward. A legacy of choosing joy, rebuilding after loss, and keeping love at the very center of it all. Lessons bloom. That night, as I rocked my grandson to sleep in the gentle hush of the nursery, I whispered every prayer I'd ever spoken, for safety, for kindness, for the courage to keep beginning again. I knew then that my story was so much more than survival. It was an inheritance of resilience, one that would last far beyond me